everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tension of Opposites. Before we begin, I know what you're about to say. Every time when I start this intro, I keep saying, I'm back on track. We're going to be doing other episodes very soon. It's wonderful, it's great, it's amazing. But I have a very, very good excuse this time as to why there's this big delay between part 1 and part 2, okay? I promise. Since the recording of that episode, I got laid off and I had to move back home and I had to look for another job, and then I found another job and I moved to another country. So here we are again in a very familiar space, but we'll get to that in due time, hopefully, inshallah. And speaking of inshallah, here we are for part 2, the second and final part of Where It All Came Together, the Arab World series, where I'm talking about my experience with my postgraduate course studying Arabic in Amman with my friend Jenny from Rome. We graduated together in December 2018 in interpreting and translation in English, French, and Arabic. And because of that, we decided to do this course in the meantime because, spoilers, we graduated in a language that we could not speak yet. Before I continue, I feel like I need to do a very, very important disclaimer that I didn't think I was going to be doing now. But the more I look into everything today, I was going through the album, like a very in-depth research with dates of all the things that I did, when did I do them, and was looking the entries of my journal and looking at the pictures on the album and speaking to my friends that I'm still in contact with. I think it's important to talk about this now because it provides a bit more context as to why this experience was so important to me. This entire podcast is based on the premise that I have 2 different identities because I have 2 different nationalities, and I've always spoken about the Italian one so far, and then this Anglophone component without ever really specifying why. And in my head, when I had thought about this podcast in the beginning, I knew that eventually I would have like a big reveal and I have an interview lined up on that and all this, but I feel like it makes sense to talk about it now. So, as I said, I am Italian because I was raised in Rome, but my parents come from another country, and that country is Malta. I am Maltese. I am Maltese and Italian. I was born in Malta, but I was raised in Rome. My parents were already living in Rome by that time, and we will have all the time to get into that. And I think it's fairly important because it informs why I decided to study Arabic in the first place. I said that I didn't really like Chinese or Russian, which is true. But the reason why I chose to study Arabic is because Maltese is a Semitic language. We don't really have knowledge of Arabic as such, but if you were to listen to Maltese, it sounds like an extreme dialect of Tunisian, I would say. And obviously, I know this now just because I can do the comparison, but at the time, when I decided to study Arabic, I had no idea. I don't even know Maltese that well. My parents never really forced us to speak Maltese. Malta has 2 official languages, so English is one of them. And every time I had to communicate with my cousins, I only did it in English, and that's how it's been so far. So I understand pretty much all of it, but I still get very uncomfortable, with forming full sentences because I never studied it formally in school. And so picking Arabic was sort of a way of trying to get that portion back. And I thought that it would be easier for me. I remember being so cocky when I had studied it, when I started doing the classes at university, saying, oh yeah, but I am Maltese, a lot of words are similar, whatever. And it wasn't that at all. It didn't help me. If anything, it confused me even more because I knew that certain things were said in a different way, but what was in my head as the right way was the dialect option. When you're studying classical Arabic, there's none of that. It wasn't until I moved to Jordan that I realized that a lot of words were actually very similar. And my parents eventually come to visit, and I remember people understanding what they were saying in Maltese to each other, but then a Maltese person wouldn't be able to understand Arabic. So it was a bit of that. But I remember feeling this connection. And only now I've made this connection and I've decided to talk to you about it because one of the people that was part of this experience, Livia, I am still in contact with today, and I met her a little over a month ago. And the first thing she said when we met was her coming to me. She was like, Helena, now I understand. Now I understand why you would say that you had such a connection to Amman and to Jordan, and why everything felt so familiar to you, because it is objectively really similar in terms of the loud noises and the buildings that have all the same hue and the same kind of color. It seems that they're carved from the same stone. And the sense of family and the culture and the rubble. There's so many things that, for whatever reason, even if Malta is very, very different in that respect right now, it just feels that there's a connection. It feels that you're like, oh, okay, we're all from the same space. We're all from the Mediterranean space. I don't know how to explain. And when I was there, I couldn't quite put that into words, because I would think, okay, maybe I'm in my, oh my God, this is amazing kind of a phase of life, which I fully was. I was 22 at the time when I did this. And everything felt that the stars are aligned and everything is perfect and I'm meant to be here. And this is supposed to, bring me something bigger and whatever. But I do objectively see now how certain things were similar. And even when my parents came to visit me, they had that sense as well. I remember my dad getting emotional over some cookies that we found in Aqaba from a tiny little bakery that reminded him of the cookies that he had when he was a kid from Dingley. And so, like a tiny village in Malta, and then you're having the same experience and you're having something that unlocks something in your childhood when you are in Jordan. It was really special to see him so emotional over something seemingly so small, but there are certain connections. And I had not planned any of this, and I didn't feel that pull when I decided to choose Arabic. But once I got to Amman, especially like after the first months of adjustment, I really felt that there was something that was drawing me to it. And something that really pushed me to want to fully commit to learn this language in a way that I never really did before. Once I was here, I was in a space where all I had to do was that. There was nothing else that was required of me. And the biggest hurdle was getting over the embarrassment, I guess, especially after graduating in a language that you do not know how to speak. It's a very humbling experience. You feel like a fraud also saying that you have graduated in this language that you cannot speak. Even in Jordan, even going to school every single day, we had entered this space that was very comfortable, very tailor-made to Europeans coming to study Arabic in a foreign country. We ended up just staying in this space of comfort by which you would be able to go home and then just say, oh yes, it was great, it was wonderful, everyone is so friendly, everyone is so nice. Because you are denying yourself the opportunity of really ever interacting with the locals, understanding their experiences, understanding their limitations. In the beginning, everything was just me. And I remember that there was a specific point in which I said, okay, but it feels that this is not really bringing to anything. Even when I was in France, for instance, you were at a point where you needed to fully get into the mindset of Paris, of French. You could not just get by speaking another language. But where we were living in Jabal al-Webde, everything was virtually made in a way that you never really had to get too much outside of your comfort zone. And we were not really interacting with locals besides our teachers, which we wouldn't hang out with on the weekends and such. And so when Jenny left, I decided to take this as an opportunity to really, really dive into the study of Arabic. I didn't have any distractions, and I was really looking forward to being in a situation in which we weren't seen as a unit, because up until that point we were seen as the two Italian girls and everything was sort of done together and decided together, and it was lovely. Like, I was just reading my journal and I was saying how lucky I felt to be with her, how everything felt extremely comfortable, and we had different routines, and that's how it worked well. And I really felt that. I felt that the entire time that I was with her. But I felt that maybe I was seen as part of this duo and I wasn't seen as me. And I was feeling very comfortable. I was opening up a lot. I was taking initiative. I was proposing to go out, and I'm not the talkative social person usually. So I was very surprised about myself, and I really wanted to lean into that. When Jenny left, she left around mid-February, I would say. She just left for 2 weeks. But in those 2 weeks, it felt like everything had happened. I don't know how to explain it, but it was just that moment where things were really clicking. The dynamics had started to shift. I started to want to live Jordan besides just visiting the different places on the weekend. And I remember there were little episodes here and there that made that possible. For example, there was this time that I was at home and our house overlooked a little tiny valley. And at a point I wake up and I hear this noise and I open the window and there was a shepherd herding his sheep right in front of the house. If we were with a driver, we couldn't get out because it was blocked by the sheep. So that was really funny. The beginning was very shy baby steps. So going to different coffee places, doing some other visits of Amman on my own without necessarily going with the specific road trips and stuff. I don't know why, but we changed classes. So we weren't with Raad anymore, who was my favorite teacher ever. And we did 2 weeks where it was just me, Amedeo, who was my other roommate, and this other teacher whose name I don't even remember, but I hated her. I felt so uncomfortable with her. This because the class started to empty. As I said, there was this girl who arrived, Livia. She's Italian as well. She arrived with the big wave of Italians, which was around the time Jenny left. And I don't really like interacting with Italians abroad. I try to steer away from them. If you remember the Paris series, I did that for, 8 months out of the 9 that I was there. And I kind of had the same approach in the beginning with this group as well. Although they were all very nice and very friendly. And we were now the people that were there before them. But Livia, my first impression of her, I always say that in the beginning I didn't like her, but that's how all the good friendships start, in my opinion. She had come into one of our classes, and at the time I think it was me, Amedeo, and Andreas. Jenny had already left, if I'm not mistaken. She came in for one class. She had already been to this school before, I think the year before or 2 years before. And she had the energy of someone of okay, I've already done these classes. I'm very good at Arabic. And so I remember she did one class with us and then she left and then she asked to switch to a higher level. So I had that vibe of okay, this bitch. But then a little after that, we got to speak a little bit more. She had chosen to live with a family because, again, she had been there before and she wanted to have a more immersive experience. And she had a different mindset, I guess, to how this was going to be. I don't remember how many months she wanted to stay in the beginning, but she ended up extending. She had left a little bit after we had left. It was interesting because she had the perspective of someone who had already been there, so she knew a lot of new spots. She had some contacts, she had some friends. So that was also interesting. I remember once we went to this dinner all together. I think it was organized by the church and the chefs were refugees, something along those lines. And then also she had a Syrian friend that she was doing a language exchange with, Belal, which I had also seen afterwards at her wedding because he moved to Italy after that. So yes, a lot of things that were very interconnected. I was really enjoying the routine that I was having. So every day I would be going to class, then I would be going to Fenwashe. At some point, Courtney or Livia would join me and we would be studying together. And everything just felt very nice, very chill. I was in my very spiritual era, coming off of a year that I was very, very, very wellness and fitness focused. And now I was very into meditations and stuff. And we had a rooftop, which had the most beautiful view over just valleys of houses. Once the sunset hits, it just has this golden hue to it. And I remember I would go up there and I would be doing my meditations and I would be journaling. I was feeling very much in a flow state constantly. I felt that I had a lot of frustration and a lot of irritation when I had left. And I felt that all of that was slowly melting away because I felt that I was getting back into that feeling that I adore when I'm abroad, where I get to experiment different things, where I get to be a bit more open in a way that you can only do when nobody really knows you. I was feeling that it was well received. I was feeling that people were enjoying my input, that I was having very interesting conversations, that I was asking very deep questions that I always wanted to ask, and it didn't come off as cringe or weird. Also because a lot of people there were older than me, so maybe that dynamic also had an impact, I'm not sure. But it just felt very comfortable to ask a lot of very deep questions, which is what I love and what I really, really loved at that point. I was very intense about that. My mom had told me that a friend of theirs, so the daughter of their friend, who was 20 years older than me, was coming to Jordan and we wanted to meet up. And I always love these random things where you just meet up with friends of friends. But this was a step beyond that, because this person was 20 years older than me. So I was 22 at the time, as I said. And we go to this place, this bar, and I think it was the first time that we went there because they had hired a guide. So there was someone who was local and they knew like all these new suggestions. And this place was really close to school as well. So I was surprised that we had never been there before. What we had done up until that point was just going to coffee shops. The evening stuff was very mature. It was mainly restaurants, farewells, and stuff like that. And we go to this bar and she is super nice. And like those people that are older but are extremely youthful, like more youthful than I ever was in my life, probably. And she was very excited about this thing that I was doing. She had never met anyone who was studying Arabic. And she was asking me, how's it going? What are you doing? I'll get you a beer. I'll get you another beer. And I remember that was the first night that I ever got drunk since I was there. And I remember her telling me, she was like, really? This is the first time? Like, you've been here for a month now. How is this the first time that you're getting drunk? I remember telling her I would like to explore a little bit more. I would like to be a bit more uncomfortable. I feel like now I'm just surrounded by the same version of dynamics. So the same kind of expats, doing the same kind of experience, doing the same kind of outings, talking about the same things. And it was weighing on me. And I remember her telling me, you can come with us. I can give you the contact of these friends of mine. They're doing cool stuff if you want. It was the first time that I had the opportunity to branch out of what was just the social network of the school. And I could have done it on my own, for sure. But it was still quite uncomfortable, especially when you see that other people are not doing it. So you think, okay, maybe I am just overreacting and this is how this experience is supposed to be. We met a couple of times and we were there and we are still in contact now. We still hang out and she's just like the point of reference when I want to have a random night out because she is very much into the expat group and every time I meet different people and yeah, that kind of vibe. Super, super cool. The kind of vibe that I aim to have, but I know I never will have. But I'm very glad that I know people who are like that. So as I said, my closest connections at this point were the people that were there from the beginning. So Iris, Courtney, Livia. Mainly Courtney and Livia were the two people that I was hanging out with the most. Livia, I kind of got to get really close with her right before Jenny came back. The first time we went out on our own, we went to eat some burgers somewhere and we ended up talking about religion and our opinions of it. And she was very religious and I hadn't met anyone my age who was religious. Usually that's something that people steer away from. So she had like an active relationship in that sense. And I thought that was really cool. And we ended up talking about spirituality and intellectual things. And I find it always very stimulating. With Courtney also, it was really nice to have someone who had a bit of the background that I was familiar with, of that connection to the States. And she was doing this really, really cool fellowship where she was traveling all around the world. But she was having a bit more of a difficult time compared to other people. She had relatives in Jordan, and she was staying at the house of distant relatives, aunties, if I'm not mistaken. And she was struggling a bit more because there were all the limitations that came from being in a family context where you feel the obligation that you have to be home by a certain time, do certain family things, and she just wasn't getting along. I never understood the full extent of what she was going through. I found out much later, but there were a lot of issues in that sense, even from the way that she was presenting. I'll explain. In Jordan, there is a fair amount of racism, as there is in any country, but there's a strong discrimination towards people from Asian countries, mainly that I remember people from the Philippines. They would be working as cleaners. They would be treated as servants in a sense. And Courtney is half Arab, half Chinese. She has very prominent Asian features. And there was a time where we would be going out a lot, the two of us. And I would notice that we would be treated differently. It was very weird. But I remember this time we went to a brunch together. And we were the last people to be served. I was not really aware of certain dynamics, but there were some moments that felt really undeniable where we would be going out and we were at this establishment. And we went in and we sat down, and then other 3-4 tables sat down after us, and everyone got served before we did. And there was this awkward silence where I was looking at her, she was looking at me, where we didn't want to say it out loud, but it was obvious that something was happening. And there were a few of these unsettling moments. She was sort of a lens through which I could see certain interactions differently. And I remember also the way that she was seeing certain conversations that we were having about Israel and Palestine. And I had just done an exam in contemporary history of the Arab world. And there was a whole chapter of Israel and Palestine. And there was a moment in which I had a bit of realization. I was like, wait, Palestine is the victim? How does that work? Because I was raised seeing on television, and there's a very strong Jewish community in Italy as well. I always saw it only from the perspective of Israel and from the perspective of the Jewish community. And I remember studying for this exam and thinking, okay, wait, but there's a situation of oppression that I wasn't really aware of. It wasn't a conversation that I knew much of. And I remember in the beginning, as I said, we would be having very intellectual conversations about certain topics. And I remember thinking, wow, how cool. We're having these kind of very deep intellectual discussions about conflicts. And then afterwards, I remember Courtney telling me it was very misinformed, the kind of conversations that we were having in this group. And it felt very from the perspective of a privileged person. I can't really put it better than that. I actually did interview her this year. She came to visit me in my last job that I got laid off of. That's fun. So we will have time to discuss this a bit more intimately, but the relationship with Courtney was a very individual relationship. So every time we'll be going out, I would have a different perspective of things. And there were also really lovely, gossipy, funny moments. But the experience that she was going through was just so directly different compared to the one that I was having, that it was just something that we would be coming up with very often. It was a relationship that was becoming very culturally, socially aware. We were going to more events that were about histories of oppression, of resistance. 80% of Jordanians are of Palestinian descent. A lot of people had left after the Nakba, and the more Jordanians I was meeting, the more of this narrative I was learning. And so that was opening my eyes a lot on certain situations. Before I came to Jordan, I was very interested in the histories of migration, of refugees. There was a narrative that was being spewed upon in Italy by the far-right movement that was on the rise at that time. Still is present right now. That was extremely harsh in its depiction of this invasion of illegal migrants that were going to contribute to rising criminality and no control of the borders. So just this constant wanting to be in control of what was going on. And I remember then once I got there that I really wanted to try to understand what was the situation in terms of migration and refugee status. Jordan is one of the countries that hosts the biggest population of refugees. And that is something that is not really talked about. Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey. The perspective of migration is always very Eurocentric. And so we always see it from an invasion that is only coming directly into our countries. But there's so many non-European countries that manage a much bigger influx of refugees that we do. I knew that at this point, I just really wanted to focus on trying to understand what was the local perspective in terms of volunteering, if it was possible, but my Arabic was still fairly limited. Speaking to people from other NGOs, and a lot of expats were living as part of NGOs. So it was a time where I was really trying to find context and to network and to find my way. March was the most eventful month ever. March and April were incredibly intense, but it starts all literally with the 1st of March. And I say that it starts from the 1st of March because I was looking in through my old messages, and I remember sending this message, I listened to it today, to my friend who was, at the time, she was in Ireland. So we were having a new experience, different perspectives, but at the same time. I remember telling her that I was feeling that everything was very aligned, that I was finally on the path that I felt was my path. Even if I was making mistakes, it wasn't making me uncomfortable anymore. I was really pushing myself out of my comfort zone. The annoying teacher had left, and I was back with Rad, and it was only me and Rad. And it was incredibly satisfactory because I just had my private lessons with her. She wasn't that much older than me, so we were building a strong rapport and we were getting very open with one another. Like, I was genuinely developing a friendship with this person who was also very, very meticulous at her work. And so I felt that my improvements were just that much stronger. Although they were only in Fusha, which there was always the same problem that then I would study Fusha and then I would go out and you can't speak that formally to people. In Fusha, you would say, أنا أريد أن أتكلم اللغة العربية. And then if you say it in dialect, it's بدي بحكي عربي. So it's a very big difference. And I could see that there was this big limitation compared to, for example, Courtney and Sasha and Livia, who were all doing AMIA classes as well. And so I had decided by that point that I wanted to push myself further and study AMIA as well. I was going to cultural centers. I was watching documentaries and discussions about the situation of refugees in Syria, Palestine, the situation of resistance groups. And there's a cultural center called Jadal Cultural Center. And if you wanted to look for a conversation partner, you literally had to write on a piece of paper, "Hi, my name is Elena and I want to, practice my Arabic," and leave your number, and you had to hang it on a little thread. And I don't know, it just felt very old school and I loved it. So the cultural things were mainly between Jadal and Darat al-Funun. I wanted to see if I could interview people, well, mainly conversations because the podcast didn't exist yet, but I had the idea of the podcast in my mind. And so I wanted to meet people that were working with different non-governmental organizations. I tried to apply to be a volunteer with Caritas, although I remember filling out the form and it was all in Arabic and they never got back to me. And I knew that there was an Italian NGO that I wanted to meet up with. I was just really trying to branch out as much as I could because I think this is what I want to do for my work. We were trickling down on the last days of Courtney, and as I said, amidst all of this, I could see the path that I was going to be walking on. I could see what the next couple of months were going to look like. I felt that a lot of blocks were being cleared out, or that I felt more comfortable dealing with certain blocks. And I remember speaking to Flaminia and telling her, I feel that I'm about to meet someone. Things are just, I don't know, they're just lining up in a way that makes sense, that it makes sense why nothing has ever really happened up until this point, and I know that I'm going to meet someone, and I feel in a much better place, I feel fully myself. And lo and behold, I think like 2 days after, a new group of people come in from different nationalities, and I remember meeting this guy, and I remember feeling a click with this guy. More than a click, it was just the first time that I actually looked at someone, I was like, okay, I kind of want to know you. Like, I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about you, but I feel that I'm actually interested in wanting to know you. And I had never felt that before. I think up until the point I was genuinely convinced that I wasn't capable of feeling things because it was never my experience. And it was really interesting because there was a point where I was like, oh, wow, I actually like a guy. That has never happened. So it was an interesting thing to happen amidst all of this. Soon enough, Jenny comes back, beginning of March. The day after, we have the lunch to say goodbye to Courtney. And as I said, we left in this in-between phase where I felt sad for leaving Courtney, but I knew that she wanted to leave and she was ready to leave. And so that was, a big defining moment of this experience ending. There was this very big new group, a lot of Italians. There's always a lot of Italians. They were a very outgoing group. So we had hung out all together a lot. Ahmad Boss was kind of like grouping them up all together. There was like more stuff happening in that sense. And a lot of things were happening in the house as well. Iris ended up moving in with us. I don't remember what had happened there, but Iris was living with us. And it was her 30th birthday. So we had big celebrations for her 30th. And in the meantime, she had become the coordinator of the school because the Italian person who was there before had to leave for whatever reason. And they asked her if she wanted to, and she had quit her job to come to Jordan and do this class. And so she was like, okay, yes, fuck it. And she was perfect for it. She was very meticulous. So it was interesting. We had someone who was directly involved with the school, a director, but she also started with us. So it was a bit all over the place. In the meantime, I had started doing also Arabic classes of AMIA. I had done 2 weeks in my school in Aklan, and then I signed up for a month in Misbah, which is another center that's on the same street. And they had a very different method. You have like images, literally of textbook from kindergarten or primary school. And you just have to describe the image. So you have a recording and she asks you to describe things, and then she describes them herself with all of the vocabulary, and then she makes you retell what they just said. She writes down everything, and then the next class, you have to basically recount everything based on the recording. But it's a very quick and effective method. I thought it was really cool. Jenny comes back and we get put in 2 different levels because she missed 2 weeks by which she was still in level 3 and I was in level 4. Everything was feeling very intense, and I felt that our friendship was also getting strengthened on a topic that we never really experienced together at the same time. She also met a guy, a Jordanian guy, and then from there the relationship even continued in that sense. And then it ended up being one after the other. This person left soon after, and immediately after we had 2 friends from our university who came to visit us, because one of them, Eleonora, she had just graduated in March and she decided to come to visit us in Jordan as her graduation trip. And we went to Wadi Rum. We go in the middle of the desert. It was so cool. And we stayed there for 1 night and we do the whole tour. The amount of emotions that were going on in those days, the overwhelm of it felt so exhilarating in a sense. We go to the Dead Sea, and from that point, something starts to happen. I start getting very, very strong cramps and I start feeling incredibly bloated. As I said, up until that point, I had almost even lost more weight than I had before because of the food. It was very repetitive. But because it was repetitive, I was really heavily on sweet things. There was all the sweets you could imagine. And I started to switch even to a sort of emotional eating that I had never really done before. So every time I would get overwhelmed about something, I would really go to town on these digestives that I really, really, really loved, with caramel and chocolate on top. So I assumed that maybe it was because of that, but I was feeling very uncomfortable in my body. I was having very strong cramps. Things were starting to feel very tight on me. But I remember that it started specifically from the Dead Sea, because when you go to the Dead Sea, you have to enter through a resort. And there was a buffet, and I remember that I felt really hungry, but at the same time I felt very full, and I was feeling very uncomfortable in my body, and we were in a swimsuit, and they were taking pictures, and I remember that, something was off. I knew that there was an organization called Natakallam, which is an organization that provides language classes that are taught directly by refugees. I knew that they were based in Lebanon. I wasn't sure if they were in Jordan as well. And so I reached out to them and they put me in contact with this girl who was younger than me. She was like 20 and she was coordinator of activities there, and she had been there for a year, I think. And she was American as well. We hung out shortly after my friends had left. We had a really good time. We were bonding over the interest in working in migration. For me, everything was very new. I was just soaking in any kind of information I could get. And she had agreed to meet up with one of the refugees who was a teacher in that school. It was just so cool to have something that was just mine, the mission that I was in at that point in time. There was a bit of disconnect between my brain, my soul, and my body, where my body was feeling progressively more uncomfortable. It was getting more bloated. I was having just a really hard time. I wasn't having a good relationship with food. And at the same time, I was expanding my mind and my perspective more and more. My relationships were getting much deeper. I was meeting always new people. I felt that I was having a purpose I had to focus on, trying to understand if this could be a viable job, if maybe I want to stay longer in Jordan, or maybe I can come back later. I knew that people were working there. I knew people that had stayed there. I knew people that were getting married there. That's a whole other topic. But I felt really determined to want to figure it out because I was realizing that time was quickly running out and I was getting very stressed by it, by the idea that I was going to go home and we weren't going to have a plan. Originally, we were supposed to leave at the beginning of April, and we decided to extend it until the beginning of May. And I was very happy about that. But I still felt that that wasn't enough time. But we were also creating a proper life there. Jenny had met a guy. Through him, he was Jordanian, we got introduced to the whole group of friends. And we never had Jordanian friends up until that point. And it ended up being a core group of people that we hung out with a lot. There was a bit of tension, I would say, because there was a moment in which this guy was like very intense and he was around all the time. And I was just like not used to that. But then we ended up being all involved in this group. Started getting quite close to the guys that were working in every single bar that we used to go to. So there were the people at Fenwache, Maestro, Rustic. All the waiters were guys and all the waiters were very young. And they were super creative and they had a lot of plans about what their future was. And one thing that was undeniable that makes you think, okay, this experience is so great for me. I am loving it. But literally all the young people that you meet want to leave. Why is that? There must be a society that is pressuring young people, that is not investing into their wants, but there's a strong pressure from the point of view of their family, of maintaining traditions, of not disappointing people. And so everyone we met was very fluent in English, and they were really adamant about wanting to leave at some point. I ended up having a language exchange buddy. His name was Yusuf, and he also was such a particular guy. He really loved poetry, and I remember once we went to the mosque together, and he drove a very old car, and it only had Frank Sinatra on it. Certain things were so quirky, it felt that they were out of a movie. And it was undeniable the level of expansion that I was having there, because it felt so flowy. It felt so easy to have interactions with people. It felt so easy to connect with people. And I would never be that outgoing. I would never be that responsive. I would never be that open in any other place or in any other experience before or after. I have written down 29th of March, and 29th of March was a very important day from the beginning to the end. The 29th of March was the day that I met with Rafa. Rafa is a refugee from Syria. Christina had arranged for me to meet with her. She just told me, we are coordinating certain activities. I have a working relationship with Rafa. Over time, it has become a very nice, close friendship. And she invites us to her house often. And so if you want and you would like to meet her, you can come to her house with me. She was so kind and generous and warm. Her husband was there as well. There were some family friends, her 2 small children. And it was incredibly overwhelming for me because I had realized I had left towards the end of January. I had left mid-January. Up until that point, I had never had a proper outing with Arabs. And it really showed how low my level was of Arabic as well, because we get thrown into this situation where they only speak Arabic, they speak very fast. They're not there with the intention of wanting to teach you necessarily the language or to speak slowly, although she was a teacher, so obviously she adapted and she knew some English, but that interaction was only 100% in Arabic and only in dialect, which again, I was just starting to study. So I was like, what is going on? But the energy was so welcoming. It was so wholesome. We just had a meal together. Like, there was no specific deep conversation or there was no pleasantries about, tell me about your story. It was just us having a meal together. And it was a home-cooked meal and it was so good. And it was a really, really joyful event that we had all together. At the same time, my parents were going to start coming and they wanted to go to Jerusalem for Easter. And I had no idea how difficult it was going to be. I remember bringing up that topic at the lunch with them and they told me, you have to look into the border crossings. You have to make sure that you have a good reason because they will interrogate you. And I hadn't even taken it into account. I just thought, okay, they will come and then we will get a driver and then we will just go by car because that's what people are telling me to do. The reality was much more complicated than that. In the evening, I meet with Jenny and Jenny was starting to go out with this guy. We go to this guy's house and they start singing songs that are of this YouTube compilation, which is the history of Arabic music. And they know it all by heart. And they start singing all together this portion. So they were these 3 guys and 1 girl. The level of interaction was very, very low. Like I didn't really know what to say to them. So I was just there quietly observing like, what the hell is going on? I'm not understanding. And they had food and they were really nice and funny. But we were like sort of an external observant in a sense. Like they would have had the crazy singing out loud partying even if we were not there. In the meantime, I start feeling physically worse consistently. I don't really know what is going on. I'm starting to get very worried because I didn't expect that I was going to get cramps because I knew that the cramps was part of the first portion of when you just get to Jordan. And I couldn't understand what the reasoning was. I really just thought that it was me being there and overeating and just me getting fat. But it was a level of weight gain that was so unlike something I had been through before. I was literally bloated. My stomach was really hard. It was pushing outside of my ribcage. My face was exploding. Like I look like a ball. Like I have pictures of me the last months that I was there, and I was just so uncomfortable. Also because I had no clothes. I had no comfortable clothes. Because I was so thin when I left, I ended up even losing weight in the beginning. My clothes were so skinny. Like skinny jeans and tops and everything, that everything was so tight on me. And I remember I hated it so much. Since that experience, I stopped wearing skinny jeans. Like once I came back to Rome, I stayed, I think the entirety of summer with just very, very loose pants and sweatpants. And that's been the vibe since. It was just really uncomfortable. And I felt that I was at a moment where I had reached a certain momentum personally and I was a bit stuck. I felt that Jenny was like moving on seriously with this guy. It just felt very intense, the whole dynamic of the relationship, of the way that Arab guys approach you. Like it gets like very quick and they don't really leave your side. And he was inviting us to outings all the time. And the schedule was always unpredictable because that's just how it is. With Jordanians, I would say you say, yeah, we just go out for a coffee. And then you end up coming back very, very late at night because stuff happens or you run into people. And it was very all over the place. This is also reminding me of a time before Jenny had come back. One of these very random improvised moments where I had gone out to Al-Karak with Amedeo and Chris and we had a really nice day. When we came back, we wanted to go to Darat al-Funun for a tea, but it was Saturday, so it was closed. And we go there and we just see that it's closed. And at a certain point, a guy walks down and he goes in front of the door and he's like, okay. And I just looked at him and I was like, you wanted to go in as well? And he said, yes. I said, yeah, it's closed. And then we were chatting a little bit and he said that he was Jordanian, but he just came back from an exchange in Germany. And he was with a German Jordanian university, which is in Madaba. And so then, out of the spirit of improvisation and friendliness, I just told him, do you want to go get a coffee together? We're going to go, on the main street if you want to come. And he was like, well, actually, I'm with my car. I'm with my friends. They're waiting inside. Just come with me. And I was like, okay, we're going to get abducted today. It was just me and Chris. And I feel like I would have probably more, more self-defense skills than Chris would ever have. But obviously they didn't know that. So I was like, are we going to get abducted today? Who knows? We're going to find out. So we get into the car, we meet these friends, and they were all 3 Jordanians that had just come back from Germany. We go to a coffee shop and we have a really nice chat and it was really nice and friendly and random. And then he offers to take us around Amman. By car, obviously, it's much easier. We would only go by foot mainly. We took the bus once, literally. And he took us around all these really big mansions that were in the wealthy part of Amman. And then he took us to a very famous mosque, which was really beautiful. That was kind of the vibe when you were interacting with Jordanians. And I say mainly guys because girls are either extremely traditional, so they don't really go out, and that would be sort of how the teachers were, or extreme rebels with crazy hair and very, very heavy makeup and dressed very Western. You would get the sense that they were a bit shunned by society in a sense. So there was a stark contrast when it came to women. When it came to men, it felt that they were very open-minded and very chill and very welcoming. So there was definitely a double standard in that respect. And I remember that also because I was still going to Livia's house. Livia was living with a Jordanian family, and we had gotten to a point where She couldn't come out in the evening because she was like, no, I can't because there's a dinner at the house or we have people over and I can't not be there. And I kept being like, come on, Livia, but you're here to be experiencing Jordan the way that you want to experience it. You don't have to be with them. But she felt the sense that it would be disrespectful not to be there. So one time I joined her and it was crazy. Like you go to these people's houses and they had, I don't know how many people over. She had an older host sister, who must have been in her early 30s probably. She comes out of the bathroom. She has a robe. She has the towel on her head. She comes in. After an hour, she comes out. Very, very puffy hair and dark makeup. She had a full glam. And she just comes out and she's like, yalla bye. And then she just leaves. From that moment onwards, that became our like catchphrase. It became yalla bye, which I loved it. But like the way that she said it was so funny. She was like, yalla bye. We were having a lot more interactions with Arabs in general and with locals. Me and Livia had our spots that we would go out to have pizza. And we got really close to the people that used to work there. Spoiler, always other guys, young guys. All the people that were working in the service industry were young guys mainly. So we became friends with pretty much all of them. And they were used to being friends with all the expats that were in that area. And this guy was Syrian. And so there was also another interesting perspective that I also got once I met up with Rafa once again. There was this time that I went to her house on my own. I don't know how the hell we interacted, but I guess I was finally understanding. Like we managed to have full-on conversations and she told me her whole life story, that she was a professor in Syria and she had to leave because of the conflict and the way that Syrians are treated in Jordanian society. That they're treated as second-class citizens and they have this perception that they are very hard workers and they will work much more on a lower wage. And so Jordanians were mad at them because of that. I'm sure that to some extent that is true. I mean, that's their perspective. So she was telling me about the terrible situation that led her to escape from Syria and the level of discrimination that she was having in Jordan. And even from that situation, and even if she didn't have a lot of money, she was just very transparent about her situation. I think her husband was looking for a job at the time. She was so lovely to me. She was so welcoming in a way that I don't think I'd ever really experienced at that point. She kept telling me if I felt uncomfortable in any way or if I ever wanted to come back and I didn't have a place to stay. They didn't have any other room, but she said, we'll make room and you can stay here. I had never encountered that before because you always have that feeling, especially in the city. I feel like the kind of hospitality that you encounter sometimes can be very performative. And when I was there was just like a sense of meaning it. And you got that with a lot of Jordanians as well, where if you needed anything and they didn't know you, they had no interest, like they could have just gone about their day. It was just a culture of like, no, we're going to be stopping and we're going to be helping you. Our day is going to be changed by this in the sense that that's why you can't never make proper plans. And every time someone says, Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow. And that means probably I will not see you tomorrow because you have certain obstacles that come in your day, whether it be structural things that are not working or transportation or something that is breaking down, or you run into someone and you offer to help them or you offer to show them around or you host them in your house and it's no questions asked. When I was in the other school, Misbah, I got that sense even more. Because in Aklan, the experience was so expat focused. Instead, in Misbah, the teachers didn't speak English. So their method was very effective because you only could communicate in Arabic. And I was put in a class, one-on-one classes with Marade. This girl, I believe she was my age. And she was engaged to the coordinator of the school. We were the same age, but we had such different experiences of life. She was already getting married, and soon after she had kids, and your role in society and your perspective on things was just so completely different compared to the one that I had. But we got so close, and every time we would be together, it was all the time laughing and joking, and I didn't understand anything. The classes ended up being very effective, but my level of communication was always very low, frustratingly. But they were really so welcoming. And I remember we had a meal all together and they would invite you to stuff. You just had the sense that people would really go out of their way to be of assistance and to help you. And that's just the way that it was. But on the other hand, you knew that there were structural issues that were going on. There was strong racism. There was strong discrimination. So even if the experience for me was very joyful and very eye-opening and very spiritual and very enlightening, it still felt that it was a very privileged perspective to have. And I don't think I had ever been in a situation in which the contrast was so evident, because it was the first time that I was in a non-European country, non-Western country. I really took that to heart. And even saying it this way sounds very privileged, because I feel like, especially once I got more deeply into the rhetoric of migration, the humanitarian world, refugees, it's always explained from the perspective of a Westerner. And it always sounds a bit tone deaf, and probably even the way that it's coming off to people who are hearing now, it sounds tone deaf, and I understand. But this was the first time where all these discrepancies were coming to light, and that I was feeling that my eyes were truly opened about something that I had never really questioned before. I had never questioned my privilege. I had never questioned my role in that space, in a space that was not mine, didn't belong to me, but that was giving me more advantages and privileges than the own people who were living there. And I knew that I really wanted to work in a space where I could be, if not telling the stories, being in a space where I would be assisting directly. And even the word assist is really bothering me, but I'm struggling to find the right words today. But that's the sense that I had at the time. I knew that I was very interested in working in migration, that migration was a very local problem to me as well. Although when I was there, I was like, no, I will go back to Jordan. I will continue perfecting my Arabic, and I will be working with refugees, specifically Palestinian and Syrian refugees in Jordan, like really, really narrowing down on something incredibly specific, like not realizing how hard it would be to actually get into that. In the meantime, I was also trying to meet up with different people, working with NGOs. There's so many NGOs in Amman. But I also kind of got the sense that they were a bit jaded. Expats that had done this experience over and over. They had been to multiple different countries. They had worked maybe even the humanitarian space, the NGO space. They weren't really interacting with you. They weren't really connecting with you. They sort of had that sense of like, yeah, okay, we're going to have this superficial conversation like I have with many, and I will probably never see you again. And I remember feeling that from the opposite side many times over, and to think, I don't want to do too many experiences abroad, or I don't want that to be my life, because I just don't want to get to a point where I'm that cynical or that detached from things. But it's a bit difficult not to get emotionally removed. Obviously, you learn that as you go along. That last month-ish was a month where everything was a bit like not as whirlwind of emotions like March was, but very solidified, structured routine. There were new people coming in, but we were also getting to a point where we were just a bit more uninterested or detached by the whole concept of just staying in the expat bubble. Jenny was very much around the new group of friends that was forming around these guys, these Jordanian guys, which were super sweet. And we were getting to explore a side of Amman that we would have never been able to do had it not been for them. I remember feeling very overwhelmed in the beginning when I met them, because I felt that the energy was just like so off the charts. It was bouncing off the walls from all of them. I felt that there was a strong limitation even with speaking, because we weren't very fluent in Arabic. They weren't very fluent in English, some more, some less. But then, as time went on, it was just such a blessing to be able to have that perspective as well. My parents were soon going to come, and I was extremely stressed about it, because it was that point in time where your parents are getting to an age where they're getting older, and you're realizing that they're getting older, because usually they would have been the ones organizing everything. And this time around, it happened that I had to organize literally everything for them, with the drivers and the crossing over of the border and who's staying in what resort and booking the hotels. And yes, it was just very overwhelming, because it was a time that I was studying in 2 different schools, and I was going through a lot of personal stuff and the stress physically and then coming. So I remember that to be a particularly intense time. I remember they arrived at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they slept in our apartment because for whatever reason, I think all the boys had left at that point. I think even Chris had left. So there was one room, and I said, our apartment was so dirty. They ended up staying in the room, the one of the boys. We didn't even clean it. We just gave them a bunch of covers that they could sleep on the cover, and then we gave them another cover to put on top. But it was hilarious, to think that our parents were sleeping in this apartment. But I just slept there one night and then we ended up leaving together. We left, and this was really adorable. Me, mom, dad, and Jenny, we got a bus. I think it was called like Jet Tour Bus from Amman to Aqaba. And it was hilarious because it was a tourist bus, but it was used by the locals. So everything was in Arabic. Really, really tight bus with incredibly loud music. I was looking the worst I had ever looked in my life. Like, I'm looking back at those pictures. My face is incredibly bloated, but all of us, where we're just looking dead tired. It's like we were going on a school trip. So we go on this school trip for 4 hours with my parents are just like all squashed in. Our first stop was Aqaba. This was the first time that we were by the sea. By this point, it's mid-April. It's already pretty hot. And we go to the Red Sea, to this resort. And it was so beautiful. Like, the sea was incredible. Because the sea of the Dead Sea is dead. Like, it's not nice. It's just funny because you can float. Which, by the way, pro tip, don't ever shave your legs before going to the Dead Sea because it's gonna burn. We stayed in Aqaba, I think, one night. And then we go to Petra. And Petra was stunning. We were walking for hours and it was already very hot. And I just remember that I had to wear loose clothes because things were not fitting me anymore. It was becoming hard for me to enjoy things because I was so uncomfortable in my body and I had never been in that situation before. It just felt so beautiful to be with my family, but also be with Jenny, and for Jenny to be so comfortable around us. That is kind of how the dynamic is to this day. I'm super comfortable with her mom. She's super comfortable with my family. She came over to visit multiple times. So it's really sweet. But that was a very defining moment, I would say, also in our friendship for us to be so much like family. But I think it was also very important that we had these moments where we were to ourselves, doing our own thing. For example, I was very much into wanting to go to cultural events, wanting to meet with NGOs, and she had her own things, and she had the gym, and she was doing her own activities, and she was hanging out more with this guy. So then I was going to go to Palestine with my parents on my own. It was an opportunity for us to be separated for another bit again. I remember an incredible amount of stress towards going there. I didn't really know much about Israel and Palestine before being in Jordan, before preparing that exam. And as I said, I was interacting with more and more people that were Palestinian, of Palestinian descent. And their perspective was very helpful for understanding certain things. Greta came into focus once again, because Greta had been to Palestine when she was in Jordan. And she told me, be careful. You do not know what they're going to ask you. I know of people that when they got stopped at the border to say why they were going to Palestine, they asked them why they were living in Jordan, why they were living for so long in Jordan, and they said that they were there to study Arabic and that they got sent back. We had the excuse, quote unquote, that we were going there for a religious holiday. We were going there because my mom wanted to celebrate Easter in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land. But I was hearing these stories of people that were getting blocked at the border, sent back. And I knew nothing of this. I had never looked into this before. And I remember that this was a time in which Ahmad Boss had really showed up for me because I remember feeling extremely frustrated of trying to understand how it worked with the drivers. We had to drive up until this point and then going to this checkpoint and then what documents we needed to bring here and there. It was logistically very complicated. And he would bullshit a lot. He would be very annoying, but he had a capacity of calming you down at the most stressful moment that I found very admirable. Like at that point, I felt I was on the verge of crying. We were supposed to leave in a few days. I found the whole crossing the border portion, possibly being sent back, and the hours that we would have to stay at the checkpoint so numbing, and I just wanted to not go. And he had a capacity like to calm me down and to say, listen, this is how it's going to work logistically. If this doesn't work, we do this. If this doesn't work, you can go from this checkpoint. He just gave me an entire plan of all the options and how we could write them out. And I really appreciated that because it was quite a novel situation to find myself in. We leave together for the longest journey ever. It took us an entire day to get to Jerusalem. We were with the driver until a certain point, the King Hussein Bridge. And then from there, we had to get on a bus and we had to get to a certain checkpoint. And then there we had to wait for a couple of hours. And I remember that we had run into an American guy who had been to Lebanon. And because he had been to Lebanon, he got interrogated for 4 hours at the border. It was this constant change of transportation that we needed to do. Go from this point to this other point, to this bus, to this security check and this other security check. And when we get to the final point, so it's like you're in an airport, you have to put your suitcases and everything through another security check. And I was so terrified of this guy asking me stuff. So my parents went in front of me and then I went and they asked me, so what are you doing? It's like, no, here to celebrate Easter. Okay. They gave me this piece of paper because they didn't stamp your passport and we were good to go. And I remember feeling like, whew, okay. From that point, we had to get another taxi that would take us to another bus. I think I was looking back at the text to Livia because Livia had been there. Livia had been there 2 weeks before me. And she didn't want to tell me shit. I asked her how it went. She said, yeah, okay. She went with her family. And I understood afterwards why. I will get to that point. But I remember me texting her. We arrived at this hostel, which was a convent, I think. I don't know. It was in Old City. And in Jerusalem, we were only in Old City. I didn't know what to expect, what to visit, what conversations to have. I was placed in a group with Rad on Facebook where she would share grammar rules and stuff. Because she told me, if you have any issues or any questions, you can ask other people who went to the checkpoint. And she was Palestinian as well. And she hadn't been back. I don't think she had ever been to Palestine because she was one of Palestinian descendants of the Nakba of 48. I remember writing on the group, does anyone know how it works to go to Israel? And I remember the response being, well, it's not Israel, it's Palestine. And I remember feeling very uncomfortable and very stressed. I was like, oh God, what did I do? I wrote something wrong and now Ra'ad is going to think that I think this way. You're taught to speak in a certain way about a country and a nation, and you don't really know that much of a difference. It was a very innocuous mistake and she was super chill about it. But you kind of went up against Westerners who were living in the Middle East. From the perspective of someone who was just understanding certain things, it feels very scary. You feel like you don't know what to say, you don't know what to ask, you would rather shut up. And I think that kind of makes it worse in a sense. I am grateful that I had the opportunity of being there myself. We didn't stay long. I think we stayed maybe 4 or 5 days. And it was the most uncomfortable experience. I felt discomfort. I felt mistreated. I felt guilty. And it was the apex of what I call my mystical crisis. I was raised going to church every Sunday. I did all the things that you're supposed to be doing. But then we kind of had this unspoken rule that once we turned 18, everyone in our family just stopped going to church. Me and my siblings, my parents still go. I'm okay to be at the ceremony, going to Christmas Mass, going to Easter Mass. I didn't really think much of it, but I just felt so uncomfortable by the contrast of what it was supposed to mean in my head. Being in the Holy Land, being in what was described to me up until that point as the city in which 3 religions peacefully coexist. I just felt this clear tension where you didn't feel that there was a coexistence. You felt that there were all these quarters that were jammed up in too much of a tight space. And it was my first experience coming up with the Israeli Defense Forces. These kids, because they must have not been older than 18 years old. They were so rude. They were so mean. There was clearly a big influx of tourists because it was a religious holiday. And another suggestion, I don't know what the situation is now, if it will ever be something or some place that can be properly visited. If you were to visit, I remember at the time I was saying, don't ever go during a religious holiday because it was the worst time to go during Easter. We would find so many roadblocks in front of us inside the old city. So they would say, you cannot go here. And we would try to ask why. And they'd be like, you cannot go here. And you have people, going out with the guns and everything. And it's really, I don't know, just tense. I had never been in a situation like that before. The only thing that I could think is if I, as a European tourist here for a religious Catholic holiday, is feeling so uncomfortable, how are the locals supposed to feel about that? I never witnessed any violence in front of me. But you could really see that everyone just kept as tight and as quietly and as strictly in their quarters. And I remember we were going to the Jewish quarter and my mom wanted to go into the synagogue. I just felt that I didn't want to be there. It really felt that I was in any place, to be fair, like in all of them, that everyone was very much keeping to themselves. Because there was just this overflowing of tension and cues and being blocked and being pushed around without any explanation. We go to the Church of Holy Sepulchre, full of people. My mom starts crying. She gets very emotional because she's very religious. And also that I felt that my perspective was, what the hell is happening in the streets? And look how they're treating us. And for them, you are walking the steps that Jesus walked, and this is where he was buried, and the historical landmarks that she had studied and heard of all her life. Of course, I was going to be very emotional. But to me, I couldn't have that feeling. I didn't feel that I had that spiritual connection to this organized religion specifically. But in general, nothing felt moving because I was just witnessing this treatment all around. And when we were in the Church of Holy Sepulchre, there was a lady that where there was a tomb of Jesus, she just threw like a bunch of rosaries, like 20 rosaries. She threw holy water on top of them. And then she just like mixed it all together and she bagged them up. And I could tell that what she was thinking is, okay, I'm going to make some money off of this because these are holy rosaries now. I would say, looking back, I wish we had moved around a bit more. But then the moving around was so tiring because it was so overcrowded and it was blocked all the time without explanation that it felt also exhausting. The day after, we get a bus to go to Bethlehem. And I see for the first time the wall. And I had no words. Like I didn't know what to feel. And it made me stressed out in a sense that my parents weren't having this kind of reaction to things. For them, it was a religious holiday and we were going to the religious landmarks and that was pretty much it. I just felt that we were at different levels of awareness. So the entire trip, I was sending voice notes to Livia and I'm trying to retrieve them and I'm not managing to retrieve them, where I was in a full-on, what the hell am I feeling? What is the sense of life? This feels all over the place. Also because in the very religious hostel, I was in my room on my own. I would always spend the evening just texting her on what I did that day and how I felt. But Bethlehem felt even more emotional to me because there's a church where you do a queue and then you walk down and technically there's the birthplace of Jesus. Just put it that way. The queue was really long because again, we were there during a religious holiday. We get in, there's a really, really long queue. And people that were coming up to us saying, you can skip the queue for 50 JD. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is a church and the people are asking to skip the line. And then we finally get to the place and you have to walk down a few stairs and people were literally like fist fighting to get that earlier. And I was just like, what's going on? Like, it felt like the most terrible display of what a Christian is supposed to be. I saw it there. I felt that everyone was sort of racing to get to places first. And we didn't stay that much in Bethlehem, but Bethlehem felt more comfortable to me than Jerusalem did. It felt more similar to Jordan, I guess. There were familiar senses. I remember like in the bus, the wall around, and I have a lot of pictures of it. This thing that you see in TV a lot, this thing that you study, and then you see it there in front of you, and it just feels very compelling in a way that you can't understand. As we're about to leave, we sort of pass in front of this kid who must have been not older than 12 years old. And he's selling fruit on the side of the streets. I remember what he looks like. He was a bit short, he was quite chubby, he had a hat on. And I remember just looking at him and thinking, this could have been my life. This could have totally been my life. Like, why is he having this life, selling fruit on the side of the street in a place where he cannot even walk from one side to the other of his own country? And I'm here just observing it and living this for a couple of days, living to tell the tale, and my life will go on like nothing has happened. And I know that this rhetoric sounds incredibly vain and stupid. Those were the first moments in which things were starting to unlock for me in a way that I just never had taken into account before. And I just remember feeling very emotional about that. I remember seeing that kid and just feeling like, why is this your life and why is this mine? But the apex of all of this was the mass. I don't know how my dad had found an English-speaking mass, but I remember that it was at night and everyone is singing and the lights are really, really dark. It's only candles. It's a beautiful space. But at that point, I was like fully spiraling. Everyone was chanting. I was not singing. I was not doing anything. I was just there and observing. But I remember thinking that if someone were to see this from the outside, they would think that this is a cult. Like, there's literally no difference to what you would imagine a cult to be. And this level of like deep, strong chanting at night, candlelight in this very like dark, obscure place. The day after, we went to the Mount of Olives. It sounds really wrong in English. Anyways, we went to the Mount of Olives and there was another mass there. And that was like the only religious ceremony that felt comfortable. I think because there was an inner part, we were in the outside courtyard, we were surrounded by the olive trees. It was the most I felt at ease the entire trip. And yeah, I remember discussing with my parents. They could see that I was fully going through it. I was like, I don't understand what the point of it is. I know that I am spiritual, but I'm not spiritual in this way. And I feel that there's supposed to be certain values. And here I'm seeing the worst example of these values, technically during a very religious holiday in the most religious place, and everything felt hypocritical to me. With the overarching context of being pushed back and forth by these 18-year-old IDFs and just feeling that there's this tension and feeling that even like the locals don't really want to talk to you more than they have to. You had the sense that no one really wanted to get into trouble. I don't know how to explain. Even though I didn't witness any violence myself with my eyes firsthand, you could tell that it was a very uncomfortable space to be in. And looking back, I wish that I had done something a bit more aware, like a tour that was a bit more aware. We didn't do any like tourist guide. We just walked around ourselves. It opened my eyes in a different way. And I remember telling Livia about this. I was trying to find the voice notes, but they're all cancelled because it was too long ago. And she told me, I knew that you were going to feel this way. I didn't want to tell you anything. I felt the same way when I went a couple of weeks ago, but it felt pointless to tell you this before you were going. It was just going to ruin your holiday. I wanted to know what you felt about it. It was the first moment that I was looking at something very differently. A very, very important moment of pride that I had that was wrapped in the same moment of sadness was on our way back. We had to do the entire journey again. And I could not wait to get out of there. I could not wait to get home. So we got on the bus, and then from the bus we have to get to a point where we go with a taxi, and then from the taxi we have to drive 2 hours to get to the King Hussein Bridge. This taxi driver was so sweet. We had this 2-hour drive. I don't know what we did on the way there. I don't think we were talking much on the way there. We left very early in the morning. We were super tired. By the time we got there, it was really late. But this time, I was the translator for my parents. It was a very different experience. They had never seen me in this space. The only other trip that we had done, the three of us, was when they came to visit me in the States, and it's an English-speaking country. And this time, everything had to be arranged through me. I took much pride in that. I organized the trip, the full itinerary. I booked the drivers. I booked the hotels. I was the point of contact if anything had gone wrong, if they needed to speak to someone. I was the intermediary of the group. I was the translator for the group. It felt really nice to be able to have that level of responsibility because I was always the little girl. I never had to take care of anything per se. I got in the front seat with the driver and my parents in the back. And this was the highest moment of the achievement that was being in Jordan and learning Arabic because I did 2 hours straight speaking with this guy. This guy was speaking in a different accent, different dialect, well, predominantly dialect, and we spoke for 2 hours straight. And I managed to hold a conversation for 2 hours straight with this guy. And I remember my parents looking at me being like, wow. But this beautiful achievement that I felt that day was quickly tampered with an episode that made me very sad. We got searched. They made us stop at the side of the road. We had to take out all our suitcases. They had to search him. They put everything upside down in his car. And I remember asking, I was like, but they didn't do this on the way here. I'm not understanding. Why are they doing this? And he said, Ashan ikhna Arab, habibti. And I felt really sad about that because he said, it's because we're Arab. When I was in Misbah, the other school, when I was studying Ammiya, they had invited me for a meal, and it was a really delicious meal. And Marade had said something along the same lines, because I was telling her, why are you doing this? Like, there's no need, it's very sweet, but you don't need to. And then she's like, عشان إحنا عرب حبيبتي. The same exact words meant two different meanings. On the one hand, Marade was saying it from a perspective of being open. This is who we are. We invite people in. Even if we don't know them well, we want to get to know them. And for him, he was expressing it as if it was a condition that was placed upon him that he didn't ask for, where clearly this was something that would happen to him every day, multiple times a day. It was just the last moment of this very, very tense trip that I was like, oh, fuck. I just want to go home. And the sadness and realization that this is just a reality that people have to live with every day. I think that was right before he left us, and I still remember his face, and he was so sweet. He was an older gentleman. I wonder where he's now. I wonder what his life is now. I don't know. It's always a bit too sad if you think about it too much, especially with everything that has happened in the past years. We cross over to Jordan. On the way out, they didn't ask us any questions, so the crossing over part was very easy. And I remember just being so happy. I was in the car with this driver, and we were in the northern part of Jordan, and everything was green. So in the northern part, everything is really green. And I remember being so happy, being like, oh God, crossed over. I can breathe. I don't know. I just didn't enjoy it in the slightest. It was the most uncomfortable I felt on a trip. And I know that this is nothing compared to other people's experiences, but I just couldn't understand how people was like, oh no, I love going there. It's like, how? When that's the life. I don't know. My parents leave probably the next day. It wasn't a relaxing trip in the slightest. It was really funny because they still talk about it like one of the favorite trips that they did, but it's not something that they would have usually done had they come to Jordan on their own. But they really enjoyed it. It was very immersive. Every day they had a new visit to a new place. And that's what Jordan is. Like, it's not necessarily the most relaxing trip, but I was so glad that they got to experience that with us. They had brought Easter eggs for me and my roommates. We celebrated Easter together at the apartment. And it just felt like the lovely way to end this holiday after fairly intense days. The last month, there were the classes of Ammiya, the classes of Fussa that were finishing up. There was always me and Ra'ad. I think at that point, new students started to come in. But, you know, we had consolidated that friendship that I still keep very near and dear to me. There were a lot of maqlubis, which are my favorite dish ever. We had a maqlube at Livia, I remember. And I also had a maqlube when I went to Rafa's house. And I have a step-by-step video that I wanted to take because I was very much in my vlogging era. I have to say, out of all the experiences that I have done, this is the most highly documented experience that you can find. I have it highlighted on my stories, I have journals, I have pictures, and I remember going to her house, spending an afternoon with her on my own. I wanted her to explain to me how to make maqlube because it's my favorite dish that I don't think I will ever be able to replicate because it's a homemade dish. It's not something that you would find in restaurants either. And I remember taking this video where she was explaining, okay, so now we do this, and then we do this step. ما شفت هاي.
شو؟
هاي.
اللوز؟
أها.
طيب كتير هاد.
أها. بس مع اللحمة كمان؟ اوكي.
هلا بقليه بعدين بحطه بصحن بعدين بحط اللحمة.
Okay, كله مع بعض.
بقليها بعدين مع بعض.
Okay. The kids in the background that were like making silly faces and laughing and everything. And it was such a beautiful afternoon, and it was the last afternoon that I had spent with her. I'm still semi in contact with her, but my Arabic is always so bad that I feel very shy to speak to her. I remember seeing my last sunsets from the rooftop. By that time, a lot of people had left. Margarita had left. Chris had left. It was very emotional, but it was also very tiring, and I felt physically exhausted. The more spiritually conscious I was, the more tired and fatigued and bloated and crampy. I remember there was this one time that my cramps were so bad that I didn't go out. I was just crying in my bed. I was like, I don't understand what I have. In hindsight, I had a bacteria. It's a bacteria that you can get everywhere. It's fairly common. It's called Helicobacter pylori. And I found out only once I got home. And it's a bacteria that you can have either with unclean water or food that is cooked badly or washed badly. And to be honest, the chances of that happening in Jordan were very high. You would get the water from this place where they would technically clean the water jug and then fill it up again. but it wasn't clean. Like, it wasn't really clean. So the chances of you getting that was fairly high. And once I got back to Rome, I got that diagnosed pretty quickly. I was on antibiotics for a month. So that was fun. That is what it was. But I had it like undiagnosed for a couple of months. And I'm pretty sure, I would think, that I got it from the night that we went to Wadi Rum. They had the dish that is cooked underground. From that night onwards, I started feeling sick, but I don't know how long it takes to activate. By that point, I was fully sick for, I would say, a month and a half, that I had cramps and bloating and everything. As much as I was sad to leave Jordan, I felt that my body was physically rejecting the place. And we were getting very close to the month of Ramadan. I think we left when it had just started. I felt that I needed to go home and I needed to reset a routine. I needed to eat healthily. I felt that as much as I loved the place and the person that I was becoming when I was there, I wasn't physically okay to continue being there. I felt that there was like a big obstacle that I was like, oh God, I just need to get this over with, sort of. And I'm sad that I felt that way the last days. On an emotional level, on a social level, everything was so nice, and the friendships that I had developed at that point were really nice. A girl who was in university with us came to Jordan as well the last month, so there was this weird overlap of watching her starting her experience and having a sense that she was getting into the mindset much quicker than I did, and she was picking up the language much quicker than I did. You have a bit of the confrontation when you're having these experiences alongside other people who are having different backgrounds than you, but you're kind of, sort of on the same level. Seeing it from their perspective 2-3 months later, I think I was very worried about what was waiting for me back home. The complete unknown. What my next job would be, if I wanted to come back to Jordan, if I wanted to go to another country. I, on the one hand, was very, very zeroed in what I wanted to do, but I had no idea of how I was going to do it. And that is pretty much where I'm at right now as well. I've always been like very determined, but with no plan. But obviously that was like the beginning, the true beginning of, oh wow, I'm actually like unemployed. I have no plan. I have no plan B. I don't know what's going to happen. The last day of school, which was on May 1st, we got a custom t-shirt done. Me, Livia, Jenny, and Margherita, with written Yalla bye. And on our last day, even though Livia and Margherita ended up being there for another month, we all wore this custom t-shirt and we just treated it as if it was our graduation day. It was really funny because then everyone else was new. They had no idea who we were. We really treated it as if it was our last day, graduation day, that everyone should be sad about us leaving. But you know, you feel like your experience is that important, and it really felt that we had achieved something great. Our last day, which was the 3rd of May, it was such a blur the last day. It was a lot of last coffee dates and saying goodbye to people that were staying there. And I felt that I had accumulated a lot of mentors here and there throughout this experience. A lot of deep conversations with people that I would be meeting one-on-one, that I would have random interactions with. They had left such a long-lasting effect on me. And not really knowing when you were going to see them again. Some were from the other side of the world. Some were going to stay in Jordan and you didn't know when you were going to be back in Jordan either. I remember Jenny was quite adamant about the idea of going back soon. I knew that I wanted to go back as well, but I felt that I physically needed to recover before I could get to that point. Like, I don't know, I felt like my body was rejecting a bit the space and the place. The last nights were very much with the guys. I got like a really nice gift from one of the guys and a letter and a bracelet, and I didn't expect that I had left an impact on the people there. The way that people were saying goodbye to me felt so genuine. It felt so heartfelt that I had met people that were going to be in my life long after this experience was over. It really felt that I had a completely different sense of myself, this experience that I had done, what I wanted to be doing moving forward. I knew that I had discovered a sense of courage, of pushing myself, of really like asking deep questions, of really knowing how to interact with people in a way that I hadn't done in a long time. I think it was the most confident I had felt in myself since I was in the States, really and truly. On top of that, the energy that that place had is undescribable. Part of the energy comes from the young people there, who are so committed to their art. we had met the most creative people ever. Everyone that we had met had their main job, and they were a singer, songwriter, creative design, graffiti artist, video maker. It was incredible to see. I don't think I'd ever felt so inspired. The energy that was there was so layered in terms of what were the traditional values, what was the unifying sense of devotion to a religion that was like so embedded into the society and to the mindset that you had, but also this desire to want to branch out from that, of wanting to rebel, of wanting to travel and to know how difficult and more difficult it was for you to be able to travel, to get a visa. I remember Yusuf ended up going to Canada. He went to university there and he's still living there. These hopes and dreams were so vivid. The commitment that people had to follow through with them was that much greater. It had to be that much greater. So the energy that accompanied that was just like that much more visible. Everyone you knew had another talent and had a very undeniable talent at what they were doing, whether it be writing or poetry or dancing or stand-up comedy. Everyone I knew had something else going on. And it was really inspiring. And I don't think I'd ever been in that space before. And I haven't been in that space since. Like, it's very rare to find a consistent group of people who has so much stuff going on, so much commitment to the arts. And they keep that going even now. It's just remarkable to see. The energy that you feel there is energy of spontaneity, of openness, of creativity, of art, of devotion, of commitment to something, of fun, of party. I remember there was one of these last parties that we did at this place, which unfortunately it opened right before we left. It was called Dali. I don't know if they still do stuff. It ended up being like a bar during the day and a club at night. And there was this time that we went out all together. And I swear, it felt like being out of a scene from Step Up. It was a hip-hop night. We were dancing and they created a circle and people were breakdancing in front of me. It was incredible because this is not stuff that you really see like during the day, like this, everything was done in very specific enclosures, if that makes sense. And it was so cool. Like, it felt like we had such a privilege of being fully out with Jordanian nightlife, visiting things that we would never visited from a tourist perspective. It was just like the last month was full on that. So that was such a blessing. The last night, we go to the coffee shops, we close up our suitcase kind of, because then me and Jenny are very like messy and everything was done in a hurry. We went out to Maestro and then we went out to another place and we literally just stayed out until we had to get our flight back home.
This is the last night for Lily in Jordan.
At that point, it must have been 2 a.m. When we were about to close our suitcase and collect our suitcases, there were balloons everywhere. And she had done like a goodbye sign because, again, it was 2 a.m. So she went to sleep. So which was really sweet. We packed up everything and still with our Yalla Bye t-shirts back on. Abdallah and Angizi accompanied us to the airport. And I don't know, it was just such a crazy way to end this experience. Barely 4 months of experience that have meant so much to me and that I think back to often. Because that was just pre-proper adulthood years. And I left with a sense of, wow, this is going to be my life now. I am 22. I am open to stuff. I feel like I have gotten over a lot of limitations that I have. And I'm ready to take over the world. And I am very determined. And I know what I'm going to be doing and whatever. And little do you know, that's just like the beginning of the rest of your life, of a very defining decade where you just have a lot of new things happening over and over and you get disillusioned a lot. It feels really nice to be able to do this now, so many years later, to be thinking about that. Even talking about it, it just fires up something in me that I haven't had in me in a really long time. Because then life happens and you get a lot of disappointments and things don't really work out the way that you think that they were going to work out. And it's so nice and possible, in my opinion, I think it's just a matter of habits, to remember that there was that little part of you, that little tiny part that still lives somewhere inside of you that thinks that the world is your oyster, that all the opportunities are open to you. And I just wish that we spoke to people, even towards the end of your 20s, 30s, 40s. I wish that we were spoken to the way that people speak to you and treat to you when you are 22. When you are in your early 20s, everyone feeds in this fact that you're young and life is full of possibilities and you need to savor things and make the most out of it. And then at a certain point, life just happens and the expectations that people place on you are completely different. And then you're just supposed to have accomplished certain milestones by certain ages. And it's just unfair in a sense, because I think I can do much more with my creativity now than I could do at that age. Just because there's like a level of awareness that brings different layers to it. Had I done this at 22, it would be completely different than what I'm doing right now. I'm grateful that I have this platform to be able to think about these things and to see what the evolution of certain experiences is going to produce in the future, because I'm fairly certain that other things are going to come out of this. But the fact that I was able to do this in the first place, such a random experience after picking a very random language, everything that came into contact with the Arab world and Arabic was completely by chance. Like, there was no thought or intentionality into this. Now defines a very, very big part of the way that I treat things and the connections that I've been able to have since, the environment that I'm working in right now. I'm in a job where I get to speak Arabic every day. And I am so grateful that I'm able to put this into practice, that I can still keep using this. I wish nothing more than to just be able to use all the languages I know every day. It represents the experiences that I've done, and it feels like, because of that, those experiences are never really over. Like, they're still living on in me through that. I know I'm getting very romantic about this now, but that's how I'm feeling, and I'm super grateful that I got to do it. And I'm super grateful that I finally got to talk about this. This is done. I mean, this is semi-done. We're not fully done, but part 2 is officially done. Thank you to whoever has come along this journey. And my wish is to be able to go back there soon. We got to go back fairly soon after. To visit our friends, and it was a surprise trip, and it was super, super fun. And, then life happened, COVID happened, very difficult to find a job there and so on. But there's a part of me that is determined that eventually I'm going back to the Middle East. I owe it to the amount of work that has been put into this language, because I know that the only way that I will be ever fully fluent is if I go back there, either Middle East or North Africa, but it is always in the back of my head, and I'm very determined to make that happen. So who knows? Maybe the next time that I will be telling you about this will be from another Arab country. We'll have to wait and see. I'm very looking forward to, in the future, being able to do interviews in Arabic as well. That is one big goal that I have, and I hope to do it, and I hope that you get to witness it. So stay tuned, I guess. Thank you very much for listening. This was a long one, but it was a very intense one, as you can tell. Thank you for following along, and yes, this is the end of this series from a solo perspective. Stay tuned, and I will see you next time.